So Rumi says that what you seek is seeking you. This is one of my favorite pointers. And the analogy came to me today in a funny way that when we feel separate or when we're seeking love or fulfillment outside ourselves, when we desire something that we believe that we are apart from, it's as if we have gone to somebody's house and we really want to see that person, really want to talk to that person. And we go there and we knock on their door and they aren't there exactly because at the same time they've done the same thing and they're at our home. It's almost a funny misunderstanding, like the gift of the Magi, when the young poor couple loves each other so much and wants to give each other a gift that the man sells his pocket watch to buy a hair clip, and the woman cuts her long hair off and sells it to buy him a watch chain. And they realize that the love is what matters. But when we seek love and we forget that love is mattering, that's essentially what the appearance of this is mattering, turning into matter. That you're mattering. You matter so much, you're mattering. When we understand that, we don't make those same misunderstandings behind each other's back, so to speak. And it's not, we don't have to prove to each other that we love them. It's just everything we do is an expression out of that fulfillment. So I've been thinking a lot recently about self-love, and I ended up listening to some Louise Hay audiobooks, and she has a very different approach. And one of the things I really like doing is exploring a wide variety of teachings and even things that are not teachings. And sometimes I think those can be some of the most revealing things. Like you just find yourself drawn to books or places or anything. And if I could give you some advice, it would be to be totally open-minded to teachings, and don't think that if a teaching is difficult to understand that it's a higher teaching, or if a teaching is very entertaining to listen to, that it's not as good of a teaching, or that if a teaching is hard to understand and is kind of dry and not entertaining to listen to, that it isn't worth really looking at. And I talk a lot about going with what you're drawn to, but I don't mean this in a shallow way in that only listen to things that are entertaining. There's something you find as you start to meditate, have insights, start to understand things less through the lens of the separate self, that you start to recognize yourself in the most unexpected places, and you start to sort of like see the light shining through things and start to recognize things that you never knew was possible, which basically results in a amazing wonderland of a world to discover. And it's as if it's not just like an unknown place to explore, but it's also like deeply safe and familiar. And recently I went to a circus with my kids, and I hadn't been to one since I was a kid. And the trapeze artist came out, and so as an adult, I am like, scrutinizing and looking at things, and I'm like, they've got to have harnesses, like there's got to be something. I'm like, they've got to have invisible, it's invisible, it must be invisible. And then it just like hit me, and I remember my head just snapped around. that's what awareness is. It's like this invisible safety harness, and we can go out and explore, and we're always safe and home, and even more profound than something that keeps us safe. It's I don't know why the phrase nothing ventured, nothing gained comes to mind, but recontextualized as if we don't actually venture and we don't actually gain. And that is so freaking perfect and freeing, and frees us to actually truly venture and appreciate, as if, nothing needs to be gained in the future, but that it is all gained, like Jesus said. And I feel like I'm going to butcher this right now, but you lose yourself, you gain the world. So self-love. So started looking into some Louise Hay, and her approach is so very different and so focused on self-love and affirmations, and so different from anything that I've explored. And so one of the processes that she said to do is to look yourself in the eyes in the mirror and say, I love you. And there's some other affirmations. And so doing this, I saw come up a lot of like non-dual, there aren't two of me, this is ridiculous, this is some sort of shallow thing, and some sort of like feeling silly, making fun of myself. But the point is exactly to see that stuff. And having a conversation with a friend, it occurred to me that that's the same thing that Phil is saying with the dream board. Like, we were talking about how it's so important to write down the things that you want. And Buddhism presents desires as something that we shouldn't have. And a desire that we're suffering for is, there are beliefs there keeping us apart from it. But the thing to do is explore, and again, like invisible safety harness, it's not that you're going to get it wrong, and to write down and put on a board in front of you, as Phil suggests, everything you want, and then see the thoughts that arise that say, I don't have this, I am unworthy of this can't happen because of this, etc., and see those thoughts and look at those thoughts until we either start to see our desires manifest in ways that they may have already manifest and we never realize them because we were so busy believing ourselves or identifying ourselves as something apart from them, or they just come about, or we see possibly that there was a deeper desire in that we weren't believing in. And so in the moment, we're free to change the things we desire, and they are always like leading us back to ourselves. So if we stay believing one teaching too much, and we don't sort of venture out and see how other people are saying things, and we're unwilling to hear the differences in how something is said, we miss a lot, because it's always a dualistic way of pointing. And so, can we actually love ourselves? And this is something that journaling became almost laughable, because if we make loving ourselves an effort, something we have to do, and then we enlist the help of a separate self to beat ourselves up when we're not loving ourselves, then we've totally destroyed the purpose. So that self-love is already fundamentally there. And what loving yourself points to is dropping the thoughts that are covering over that love, dropping over the thoughts that are criticizing yourself. And we see that there are no self and others, because when we criticize or blame others, it still feels off. And that's not loving ourselves, because we're choosing to focus on those thoughts in the moment. So I've come across people who really detest the way that, or at this point in their journey, they are very turned off by the way that non-duality points and says there is no self. And they find that very sort of destructive way of pointing. And then there are others who, in non-duality, hate the self-love teachings. But again, those teachings are for you, and you are free to explore things, and you always know how they feel for you, how you are interpreting things. And so I highly suggest, like, putting yourself out there and doing the things that seem silly. Like, try it. Look at yourself in the mirror, look yourself in the eyes and say, I love you, and see what thoughts come up, and see how funny it seems, and the making fun of ourselves. And I think I have a sneaking suspicion that this is one of the ways we veil humor, is that, like, at some point, again in grade school, we began laughing at other people, or maybe laughing at ourselves, in order to avoid looking silly when it wasn't really funny. And so sometimes we laugh when things aren't really funny. And just like you shouldn't settle for anything less than love, you shouldn't settle for anything less than real humor. Because this is a funny, funny place where we are appearing, we're thinking we matter, not realizing that we are mattering.